Wait. What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for watching today. We got a great episode again with me is my volume not on Monday, May 5th, 2025, Cinco de Mayo at 3:24 p.m. Eastern Time. uh Had a guest, but something popped up for them. They had to reschedule. So I guess this is going to be a true solo rant because normally when I do a solo rant, I very rarely like schedule a solo rant. It's normally because a guest didn't show up or I just didn't have no, it's either because the guest didn't show up or more often than not, it's like I have an opening and I decide not to schedule and do the solo rant. The solo rant is where I just fill 30 to 45 minutes of air with my angelic voice. Normally I try to keep like an idea, unless it's like time dependent about a news story. Normally, I try to keep an idea or an observation or a couple of them on the back burner. Just put it down as like a note and be like, I'll save that for like a rainy day. Guest doesn't show up. Gotta have something out, whatever. And it was birthed from early on in the show, where I think like 1 week straight, like even before I hit episode 100, guests just kept canceling, and I was getting so angry because I was like, I want to keep putting out content. I want to build this thing. So now it's kind of the same thing. So. But I would say there are like two types of solo rants. So the ones where it's an idea that's kind of been in the back burner in my mind, observation. Every once in a while, be falling asleep and have a thought, just an observation about, either my life or lessons I've learned or, hi historic similarities between two things or whatever. A thought. And I'll put that down and it's either something I want to get out or it's a thought that I'll almost have like an asterisk on and be like, I want to flesh that out. And because I get to do the podcast for a living, I'll be like, I'll save that. I'll flesh that out. Now, yesterday I did that with just it was an idea I had the other. It was actually a very recent solar rant idea. Was that well, you can go watch it. It's yesterday, but it's the idea that quantum computing is essentially a breakthrough is the equivalent of like a hydrogen bomb versus conventional explosives, but you don't have to test it out in the ocean where everyone sees it. But it would still be the equivalent paradigm shift of power projection of that of a hydrogen bomb to say, Roadrunner, Acme, TNT. Today I wasn't expecting the guest to cancel. So I gotta do a solo rant that this is more of a it is kind of I wasn't prepared for it. But it was an idea I've had that I've tried to put into words before and didn't think I didn't realize it till a couple weeks ago that I had had the words to put it together. I just didn't know it. And it's the idea of DARPA or whatever placeholder for the very advanced bleeding edge of things, and uh, and the OODA loop, OODA, which I know nothing about. I got to hang out with Ted I and Dale on a couple occasions like several years ago, and they were one of the things they were talking about was like the OODA loop. I was like, the fuck is the OODA loop? And I didn't realize like the importance of and I'll read it just so I'm 100% sure on it. Observe, orient, decide, act. You see something, change yourself. Let me just look it up. Make sure I have it. Observe. This stage involves gathering information and sensing the environment. So you're seeing the thing, the situation. Orient. The information gathered is then processed, interpreted, understood in context. So you observe where am I, what's going on. Or I do this in video games, in like Tarkov or Helldivers, where like things can go sideways really fast, and every once in a while I have to, hey, calm down. Where are we? All right, we're here. That exit's blocked, and we think there are guys over there. I'm at 80% health, still have a lot of ammo, but we only have this much time left in the map. Okay, that would be observe. I guess orient would be Okay, so here are the variables. Here are the selection factors pushing us in this way or that way. What's the goal? Obviously, survive, get out, win, whatever. Decide a course of action is based, or it's the best, it's not perfect, but that's where we're going to go. This is the least worst thing. If this happens, you do that. If something happens to you, I do this. Act. All right, go time. And then DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which I always think it's someone like myself that just I love hierarchies, I love tiers, thresholds, is that it's not even a normal like advanced research lab. Like you have your, whatever, your military outfit, your defense contractor, and then you kind of have like the special select crew. Like the good, like no, these guys are pushing the envelope on this, that, or the other thing. And then there's the level above that, which is DARPA. Every time I start a solo rant, fire trucks, ambulance, it's very rude. It's also very sad because I guarantee you I know exactly where they're going. There's a homeless and there's people are always ODing outside. And it's just sad. Um, yeah, it's exactly. To dampen the mood, we're going to talk about military contracting, a real sunny prospect. But there's your army, and then there's Green Berets or Rangers. There's, your Navy, and then there's, Navy SEALs, and then there's the Apex. There's Delta Force. There's DevGru, and then there's Ground Branch, but that's Apex in a different way. You're not getting like the Gucci loadout. It's more of they're throwing you out into the wild with nothing versus something like, Delta or DevGru, which is you're Gucci'd up and you're ready to go. Um, but DARPA's like the DARPA's like the research lab of the research labs. It's really the apex, and there is no profit motive. I say that naively. It's like the bear meme of looking away. It's like no profit motive, but we're going to hand off all these taxpayer funded ideas to Lockheed Martin. The taxpayer funded 100 ideas. 99% of them didn't work. One of them did work, and I'm sure that's what happens. I also don't care, but it is, and it's like it's far out research. Like my dad was involved in the food industry forever. Big corporations with like research labs, and he'd say you always want to be cutting edge because that means you don't want to be going through the motions. You want to be always vying for that number one spot. Because like he said, the guys would tell him you never want to be bleeding edge. You never want to be at the very front because that most of the time is not profitable. You're really fucking up a lot of stuff, and you're really investing exponentially larger gains or exponentially larger amounts of resources for diminishing percentage of successes and thus gains. And obviously, government funding primarily is good at doing things where there isn't an immediate profit motive, or there might not be one at all. And that's where government funding is good. Yes, that's where it is good. Things like the space race, the Human Genome Project, building out of ARPANET, the Eisenhower Highway System. Yes, it is good. All those papers and conferences between like 1918 and 19 like 30, basically about seeing what was possible in terms of aircraft carriers. Like no one wanted to fucking do that. No one could do that. And for every one of those things you see, there's a million of them that don't work. Like I was just reading last night about this microclimate uh, suit, like a space suit, basically for soldiers in jungle areas or even desert areas, how to keep cold. And I think ultimately they decided that like, it's not profitable. There's way too many weak points, whatever. But when you're at the level of government resources, especially something like the United States, I mean, biggest economy there is. There's a lot of, no, obviously there's, waste, fraud, and abuse, which I imagine is most of it. But there is the ability to throw shit at the wall and not have it make or break you. I'm not that way. I'm desperately trying to keep this show above water financially. But in a sense, I could say I am that way in podcasts. Like of 1,700, this is episode 40, 1,740. This is big enough, and I have a big enough group of people that like the show and watch the show to where I can try out new things, be it a new mic or let's just go with a new I don't know a new topic type. I mean, maybe people that give presentations as opposed to the back and flow of a conversation. Or I can try out episodes where you have two guests and three of you together, four guests, three guests, four of you together is the upper absolute threshold, and even that's really only good specifically with the bald ones. Kunstler call them Luongo because they all know each other and we've done it before. If you just have three, it's normally really not. The two guest thing you can do more of, but even that is like you're bringing in someone like, hey, Tom, here's my buddy who's a doctor. And he comes in and, the guest I have is sort of like an intermediary. And the doctor, whoever, is somebody who wasn't just comfortable coming on talking to me. So you can try that out. I've done enough shows and I frequently do enough shows that I can take a risk like that. What does four guests look like? What does five guests look like? What does a 3 hour show look like? What does a 5 hour show look like? And it's padded on both sides by the regular shows, the authors coming on talking about a cool book or having someone on talking about their experience, something, having someone on from, I don't know, the intelligence community or the scientific community talking about a current topic, having people come on and talking about prospective events coming from the future. I have enough of like the meat and potatoes that I can sort of pad more unique gambles to where if the unique gamble doesn't work, I'm not sure it's a day of my time. And maybe I did one of those episodes a week for a month. Yeah, it's a thing. It required brain power and scheduling, and it didn't work. But I always look at that as like, well, that's something I figured out now, and that I don't have to do now. And then it also gives you confidence in like trying new things. Just like the very idea itself of like, oh, that's something where I'll probably have to do an episode, like one of those a week for a month or two. I'll want to track it, look at the views, view hours, downloads, share, see how it was, see how did I feel about it, what was the feedback. And then if I don't want to do it, don't do it. But every once in a while, you have something that hits, and it almost kind of makes the rest of the failures worth it. I had on Column, I had on Luongo, I had on Kunstler. Then I had Column and Kunstler, and then I think I had Luongo and Column, and then I had all of them to get. And now it's like that's like a fan favorite as well as one of my favorites. We just have those and we get together and it's just a fucking blast. And then in terms of like views, view hours, like actual, rubber hits the road, where does it turn into revenue? It's absolutely worth it. And I would say so. What about all the other failed shows I did where maybe they only got 10% of the regular views or downloads? The successes, like a bald ones or something, the successes outweigh financially, statistically, all of the failures. The failures being, well, what if I had not done the failures and just did a regular meat and potatoes episode? It's still worth more than those. So, how do we then apply this to something like $1 trillion economy? Well, with the cutting edge of like Lockheed Martin Skunk Works or like a Boeing Phantom Works, or I'm sure Amazon or Microsoft or Tesla, I'm sure they all have their own works type thing. That is still based on profitability. And they probably do it because some of it's very I know Google is really good at that early on. I think from my limited experience, they've kind of become like a bloated empire now, holding on to it, digging its moat. But early on, Google was just undeniably just revolutionary in everything they did. Early on, Apple, same thing. I'm just I'm just pontificating about like the successful states of trillion-dollar corporations as I'm like trying to make enough money to pay rent. I'm reading a book about Calvin Coolidge, and actually, he there's a young Coolidge in it, and he talks about saying, "Boy, he loves being a lawyer, he loves arguing, he loves reading, but the terror of never knowing where the next week's paycheck comes from." And you can tell the time because he's like, "It would be so much better to work in a mine and know where your next $12 a week was coming from." But basically saying, "But I persist because this is just so exhilarating." I kind of felt that. I was like, "Yeah, I how good it would be to know where the next month's rent was coming from." And then his whole motto of just persist, of just keep on, has kind of always been my logic. It's just, it does just work harder, shut up, just work harder. To the government funding, well, then where is it, is it profitable? Well, you could argue but you could say it's profitable in a different sense. In what they're dealing with, the currency they're dealing in is hegemony, power projection. Yeah, I guess you could say, and literally, protecting shipping lanes, protecting foreign interest, America and her interest. Yeah, it probably is financial, but that is DARPA. Is which way are we taking the entire behemoth of the DoD, and I guess even larger, the entire defense manufacturing industrial base at large? And then this is the thought that I always had trouble putting into words was at that level, there is a real value to simply being first, in that even if the route you are choosing is not objectively the best or all the kinks aren't worked out, there is a massive advantage to simply choosing that because you have now set the stage that others have to follow through with. So, for instance, no, it wasn't. It was the Wright brothers. But let's just pretend like the idea of heavier than aircraft, where let's say that was done by DARPA, which is 60, 70 years before, 50 years before DARPA. But let's just say it was done by DARPA. You might look at it and go, yeah, there's not as energy as efficient as railroads or boats. It's very niche. The advantages it does have are amazing, penetration. You don't need to have tanks. You can just fly over. This is the time before any aircraft because there's no fucking aircraft. Excuse me. It has some advantages, but it might not even be the most advantageous of whatever new radical technologies DARPA is funding. The very the very fact that you're choosing this and pushing it forward, you go whatever, again, whatever, just na what Russia and China and Germany, whatever, are funding. You go by making up our mind and just acting on this. This is the plan. It's a plan. It's not the best plan, but just go forward with it. You are now putting them on the back foot. even if they have some project that they think is better than aircraft, but it's 10 years out, they shouldn't, but they can really no longer pursue that. Now they're on the back foot. They now have to start coming up with, anti-aircraft measures. If we know that we're choosing aircraft, we could start red selling it and going, and they're probably going to build anti-aircraft measures. So maybe we should start building them for when they build aircraft, but we should start building them and testing our own stuff against it to nullify theirs. They would have to, like a 0 day exploit, they'd be on the back foot. They'd have to start anti-aircraft measures. And then they'd also have to start aircraft measures because they want to be able to deterrence, tit for tat, response strike, counter value targets. And by doing that, you are forcing them into your paradigm. So even if your paradigm is not the best, and if that wasn't their original plan, forcing them into it, they are now on the back foot. And really, the only advantage, you want to make sure it's not something that they happen to be really good at. Be like, wait, they have like the best scientists in the world. Maybe we shouldn't do this whole aircraft thing. But there is something to getting in their OODA loop. But as opposed to, where Delta Force is doing it in fractions of a second or even in the battlefield, this is like a decades long OODA loop. You push them to do this, they have to start reacting. They can no longer fund whatever railroad X or aircraft or ship Y. They have to start building aircraft. And now, because you have the heads up of you started first, you know the pitfalls, you know what weak points to look for based on your own plans, and you simply have them on the back foot. They now have to start dedicating manufacturing ability, natural resources. You might know, and making something up for, you need gallium for aircraft, and we've already wargamed that out. So before they even realize that we have an aircraft, we've already started, you know, buying up gallium mines or putting our military forces around them. So now there's a choke point. So it might not even have anything to do with aircraft so much as it's they now need gallium and now we've bottlenecked the gallium. Like it's more of taking action first. And this is again with as somebody with zero military background on any of this shit. But it's a thought I've had for years about DARPA of really it's forcing them to just play your game. It's just forcing them to play your game. And then as that goes on, you'd want to make sure that they don't 20 years later get inside your OODA loop. So you might have chosen a path already, aircraft. After decades of it, you might be like, the next thing is like, well, what's even higher? It's space. All right, well, we got to go get the Nazi scientists. But then it's just like, we already have the lead. We have to just keep taking the lead. We just have to get better at it. And in that sense, it's less of the actual technology and it's more of very simply the theme of being ahead. And they could say, well, what about something like a phone, like a flip phone or a pop-out keyboard? Like that's not necessarily sure if whatever, the Motorola Razr is saturating the market, other companies are going to want to get in there to help saturate, to counter saturate the market. But ultimately, a better technology would supersede it, like a touchscreen. And that's true in that sense of sure there's an OODA loop, but just because they did the Motorola Razr first doesn't mean that they're now ahead forever. You can counter that with an iPhone or whatever the fuck or a Palm Pilot. I don't know if that same logic applies at the level of cutting edge of military applications or technologies, because everything else is sort of under that lead umbrella, that like lead shockwave. It's the idea of, the military doing something and you going, well, that's a war crime. The U.S. Army just committed a war crime. How are you gonna, so what do you do about it? Well, that's illegal. Well, so then are you gonna enforce some sort of punitive punishment? Same word. Okay, yeah, you and what army? If a cop does something, you could say that's a whatever, a war crime or whatever, a violation. I don't know, some court could decide it was, and they're gonna throw you in jail. Well, how do you throw the cop in jail? Well, you have other cops and you have higher level. What if the whole precinct says no, you fucking send in the National Guard? It's an escalation of violence. Once you get to the level of like, well, that's a war crime, you have to stop that with the ability to make war because you're at the highest level. So in terms of that, it doesn't necessarily seem like I think getting inside the OODA loop is probably something where in something like a more appealing technology, the iPhone is more consumer friendly than the whatever, or the iMac versus the PC or Xbox, PlayStation, or whatever. There is OODA loop advantage, but they can also be simply having the advantage isn't enough. Like maybe you get so far ahead with your flip phone capability, you drop the price and blah blah blah, and sure that's very appealing. But at a certain point, you're gonna have people who maybe aren't necessarily constrained by, they're not, a third world farmer that needs a flip phone. They need a phone. It might be, suburban people in the United States being like, you know what? It's 2005. I think I might buy the iPhone. It's 10 times as much money, but it's legitimately better. So it doesn't seem like that holds true as a constant, unshakable law. At the power projection level, that's a war crime. You're flying your aircraft over my country. How are you going how are you going to punish them? You need to fucking shoot it down. And if you can't do that, you need to start flying aircraft over their country. So in that sense, it seems to be less of the product and more of very simply making the first moves and putting them on the back foot. Now, if you had a truly revolutionary quote unquote product, you might be able to subvert the existing OODA loop. But I think that too is something where you see it at a much larger level. It wouldn't be like the iPhone cutting it on the flip phone market. That's the shifting of polar power, monopolar, unipolar, bipolar, global power. And I feel like that probably happens over decades, if not century plus. But so it seems like that is something you would want to do. Like for instance, let's say China did COVID. They didn't, the United States did, but let's say China did. It wouldn't even matter how effective it was. As Tim Dillon said, people say it wasn't a very good bioweapon. No, it was a pretty good bioweapon if you didn't want the immediate result to be the United States nuking you from orbit. Yeah, I'd say it was a pretty good one. If you just kind of wanted to disrupt shit. But you could very well, let's say it was, again, it was. So fuck it, let's just say it's us because it was us. You've now put the rest of the world on the back foot. They are now going, we need like bio defense. We now have to, and even if it's not the most viable weapon system, the very fact that you're now on the back foot, and if you don't have bio defense, a better COVID will wipe you out. You now have to invest in that. So whatever other thing you were making, your own stealth aircraft or a tank or a drone or a new artillery shell, you now have to start funding bio defense and bio offense. Well, I mean, right after 9/11, one of the huge, you can find it very early on. One of the huge things we started investing in right after 9/11 wasn't Humvees and MRAPs. It was bio offense and bio defense. Like, what the fuck? It doesn't really sound like the sandbox war. But that's something we are heavily doing in like 2002. So let's say the shot fired was 2020 with COVID. You now have a bunch of other countries that are like, hey, we need to start making biodefense and biosurveillance, and we need our own CDC and our own Fort Detrick and our own. We're now 20 years ahead though. So we're gonna go. They're gonna start doing this. They're gonna start making their own biodefense. They're gonna, and what are the things you need for? I don't know. What are the materials needed for clean rooms? What are the materials needed for testing and genomic sequencing? And they're gonna need X, Y, and Z, and we know because we've already done those. So they now have to pursue that path, which means that we should keep pushing this path because if they have to sink money into X, we should make it X squared or X cubed very simply to stay ahead. Again, it seems like it's less of the actual weapon system and more of just staying ahead. And then there's a whole bunch of, subdivisions of, false defectors, have your own people over there, leak false information to them, lead them down false paths or anything, or it could simply be tie them up and their intelligence resource, the number of brains they have, tie them up in this and we're 20 years ahead. That gives us some breathing room to think of the next thing to puncture that status quo. Even if the status quo is us being in the lead, you now want to make the next whatever fucking thing you're using to perpetuate getting inside their OODA loop. This also might be me projecting an IQ, a savvy, a wisdom, and a planning that maybe doesn't exist. This might be me going, oh, that was done so be like whenever we're playing like Helldivers or something, and it just goes south and everything gets fucked up and nothing, and then we end up somehow or another by complete accident winning the match. Like the inside joke is always just how we drew it up. It's like the end of a play of a football game when there's like 19 laterals and then they finally score. It's be like, yeah, just how we drew it up. It being obviously mocking because we had no idea what we were doing. So I also don't know if that's what this is. If it's just like you have some guys at DARPA like, yes, just how we drew it up. That's just how we drew up the internet. It might just be, and that's almost scarier if it's just an emergent phenomena. That's almost more horrifying. But so like we could use the Ukraine war right now and drones. I imagine the United States is probably still in the lead with this shit. Could be China. Whoever. Let's say it's Russia. Whatever. Let's just remove the whole passion of nationality and just go, let's say it's Russia. Let's say Russia's doing this and they're really, it's well, why are they perpetuating the war? How come they're not ending it? They're really fine honing their drone warfare. And you might say, like, man, those drones aren't advanced as like a United States stealth bomber. Well, let's just say we had no drones, zero drones. We just had never built any of them. And Russia just invented these little quadcopters. Let's just say that idea didn't exist prior to 2022. It wouldn't matter that you could probably come up with a better weapon system than drones, than cheap mass-produced drones with grenades on them. But you would now have to counter that because if you didn't, they're going to get ahead and they might start bombing you with drone swarms. So even if you didn't want to get involved in the drone game, you would now have to. And unless you have like a wall of sea whiz or lasers or like, limited EMPs, you're gonna have to start researching how to counter them. And if you're Russian, if you're doing this correctly, you would have already been doing that on your own testing grounds and going, all right, so we found the most, whatever the most effective way is a combination of of lasers, sea whiz, and EMPs. And here are the pitfalls of each of them, and here's the best ratio of each of those. We also now know that the United States is going to be researching this. So we need to start building our own drones that are better at evading those three, as well as amplifying our own defenses of those three. And again, it's less of is it the superior technology and more of it now exists. And if you don't counter it, now it's different because the United States has two oceans. Fuck yeah. But let's say we didn't. Let's say you're Ukraine. You'd be like, it doesn't even matter if we think drones are stupid. If we don't have a defense for this now, they're going to start sending in swarms of them and kill us. So you now have to counter it. And you're on the back foot. Now you're putting resources into it. And they're a couple steps ahead. And then one day, something new comes on that completely voids drones. And you are now once more on the back foot. So I wonder if that's what something like DARPA is not even necessarily to, per their mission statement, build the weapon systems of tomorrow, but rather, very simply, to keep the absolute tippy top of the other country's brain power and resources and espionage and counter espionage and industrial base and then resource extraction around the world. Keep there's still everything under it. There's still old OODA loops, planes, aircraft, satellites, submarines, nuclear weapons, but those have now settled into seemingly a perfect state of stagnation and deterrence. And now there's the new OODA loop. It's it's all the skyscrapers in New York. That at one point, like that was the tallest one in the world, and it was 20 stories. And then there was a 22 story, and then there's a 28 story, and it's knocking on my door. Fucking hope not. It doesn't mean that you can like stop using those old technologies, but it's rather that they've kind of hit a point of, it's like the first hotel to offer Wi-Fi. Like that's now an industry standard. It's an everything standard. Your fucking gas station should have Wi-Fi. It doesn't mean you can just take it away now and go, okay, well that's a wasted thing. That's no longer in the OODA loop. No, because that's actually it's still a point pushing on one another. But it's just you're moving above that now. Those are still locked. Okay, move forward. I wonder if it is just too simple, almost like a laser pointer. Like you keep their cat occupied, and we can keep our cat just a little more occupied, but also researching how to find the next laser. And it might be like that's the most effective way to keep peace. It could also be that if you use that OODA loop advantage to go for world domination, it might be that that can only work so many times. Versus if you very simply keep that OODA loop to keep the other side occupied, you could have fractional hegemony, but not outright global full spectrum dominance, and very simply keeping them on one back foot and you on one front foot forward. It might just be like a roll of the dice, be like, hey, thank God the United States is in that position for all of the flaws. Like it is undeniably better to live here than Russia or China. It's just, and if you fucking disagree, where do you live? Like, I guarantee you, you live in the United States. Well, it's better in UK, but you won't move there. So I don't know. That's just kind of an idea I've had for a couple years now and haven't really known how to put it into words. But it seems like it's less of what it is and more of simply being first and keeping the other one on the back foot. It's like whenever there's like a really good player and on a basketball team or something, you just always double team them. Even if that player doesn't get to score a single basket or get a single rebound, you have tied up two of their five resources on that singular resource, which definitionally frees up one of your resources. If one of your five is freed up, that gives you a 20% lead to try to control the flow. And it might be that just on a global level. And instead of basketball or flip phone market saturation, it's which ideology prevails. I think you go even higher and go, and how do we going to take this lead and guide it to what? Maybe you can now guide it to endpoints you want. Maybe you resist, say, a totalitarian dictatorship taking over the world because you have pushed the OODA loop in a way that we're now pushing it towards the distant horizon of space colonization as opposed to a distant horizon of totalitarian digital surveillance. It might be something like that. I don't know. And it's on like such a high level and it's so abstract and happens over such a long period of time that you can almost just throw your hands up. So I don't know. It's just something I've thought about. Really, I think 2021 or 2022. So when I first started thinking about it. I just haven't known how to put it into words. I think I did an all right job, but probably not great. So that's it. Just kind of wanted to get that out there. So thanks for watching, guys. I love you.